All right, welcome everyone to Class 5 on Mars in the series of Hermetic Astrology on the planets. It's great to have you here, and I'm hoping our friends out in the world of internet that are Mac users have come up with the solution so that they can also view both the classes live and the archived classes. Our normal camera woman director, Barb, is gone this week, and we have our backup here. Yvette Fortin is here, and she's going to be doing the camera work tonight, so a big hand for Yvette. And I'm going to warn all of you, I came down with a bug today, so I'm feeling quite poorly and will be doing my best to make it through 2 hours of class. There might be some emergency breaks, so bear with me if the two interlaced trines show up on your screen. There will be time for a break. Also, those of you that may be joining us for the first time this evening, out through streaming television, Church of Light TV, on the right of your screen is a list of the classes. And you can find tonight's class, click on handouts, and a PDF file of the handouts will show up, and you can either follow along with that. I advise you're printing them out. We will, in the middle of our session tonight, be looking at a sample chart of a dominant Mars personality. It is easier to read the numbers, see the glyphs for the planets and signs, study the aspect graph and the astrodyne table if you print it out rather than trying to read it off your screen. And most of you know the technique by now, that if you double click on your screen, it'll go to full size, and then if you want to shrink it down again, you just hit the escape button. So I think those are all the rules that you need to be able to follow this course online. I do always like to start the class with a quote relative to the unconscious urges of the planet that we're studying. So tonight I chose Plato. There are two things a person should never be angry at: what they can help and what they cannot. Mars, the fourth planet from the Sun, is a terrestrial planet with a thin atmosphere. In July 2008, water in the form of ice was discovered by the Phoenix Mars lander. Mars is often referred to as the red planet because of its reddish tinge. Those of you who actually go out and study the night skies in the last couple of months, if you've looked to the eastern horizon after sunset, you can see Mars out there in his reddish pink color, and because he's pretty high in north declination at this point, he can be seen rising in the northeast. Mars' surface features include volcanoes and rifts, like what would be found on Earth, as well as impact craters, such as we might see on the surface of the Moon. Mars' seasonal periods and rotational cycle are similar to that of Earth. Mars takes 687 days to orbit the Sun and spends just slightly over 57 days in each sign of the Zodiac. So basically 2 months in each sign, except for those periods when Mars goes retrograde. In mythology, The ancient Egyptians noted that Mars glowed distinctively red, and they dubbed the planet Horus the Red. Observing the planet's retrograde motion, they noted that Horus sometimes travels backwards in the sky. The name of Cairo, the capital of modern Egypt, comes from Al-Qahira, an ancient Arabic name for Mars. Under the stellar religion of the Babylonians, Mars was Nergal, the fiery god of war and destruction. To the Greeks, Ares represented the unpredictable violence of war, which could express as bloodlust and savage warfare. Ares, quadriga, or chariot, was pulled by 4 fire-breathing stallions. In Sparta, he was propitiated before battle. Among the Romans, Mars was well liked, unlike Ares, his Greek counterpart. He rivaled Jupiter as the most honored god in ancient Rome. To the Hindus, Mars is the male god Mangala, or Angaraka, he who is red in color. Unlike his Western counterpart, Mangala is celibate. The English Tuesday is named after the Nordic god of single combat, Tyr, the equivalent of Mars and Ares. Martes Dies is Latin for Mars Day, which became Martes in Spanish, Mardi in French, Martedì in Italian, and Dimanche in Catalan. In ancient Masonry, Zane describes the origins of Mars' symbol. He says, Mars is symbolized by the circle of spirit surmounted by the cross of matter. He is just the reverse of Venus, and expresses matter overpowering spirit as a force for destruction. Instead of love, we find passion. Instead of grace, we find strength. Instead of art, we find war. There is nothing submissive about Mars. He will dominate or die. Strife is his joy, and conquest his religion. His desires are insatiable, and he knows no right but might. Those dominated by Mars are selfish, aggressive, cruel, and will brook no interference from anyone. Their selfishness, however, is very different from that of Saturn, for they are lavish of their substance. It is being used chiefly as a means to gratify their passions and appetites. Vulcan is the planet Mars in its most constructive aspect. Mars is the planet expressing that one of the 7 principles of nature, the qualities of which are combativeness, aggression, fiery impulse, and passion. So in the soul, we describe Mars as ruling the aggressive urges. These express through courage, passion, strife, antagonism, and effort. Wherever Mars falls in a chart, we say that the house influence is that of strife. Let's see. Sorry, guys. Now, the positive traits which we associate with the planet Mars are the qualities of initiative. Mars gets in there and gets things done. He does not sit around passively. The negative qualities which are associated with Mars are the qualities of harshness. Mars does things in a way that can be abrupt, sometimes even cruel. He was known to Manlius in the 2nd century as the minor malefic. And what this means is that Mars brings 1/4 discord to the chart. This is both to the sign in which he falls, to the house position in which he falls, and to every aspect formed by Mars, regardless of whether they are harmonious, discordant, or neutral. Mars brings 1/4 discord. Now, we human beings are not the only creatures to express to some degree the aggressive urges of the soul. If we look to the vegetable kingdom, we can see that plants produce thorns and spines for protection. Whether in your cultivated garden you accidentally bump up against a rose, or walking down any one of the streets here in Albuquerque, it's not hard to bump up against the spiny cacti. So these plants both developed this as a form of protection. Mars can either be aggression in the form of offense, or it can be defense, the form of aggression for self-protection. Now, insects, on the other hand, develop both stingers and venom. Animals have horns, teeth, and claws for both killing and defense. And certain animals have developed venom. There are other animals, such as these bighorn sheep, that will enter into deadly combat in order to win a mate. Here you can see their desiccated bodies. They became intertwined with one another. Humans develop tools, either to obtain food or to create shelter. And humans develop weapons to defend their territory. So these are all expressions of the aggressive urges of the soul. Now, in mental alchemy, Zane says, thinking about lust, destruction, construction, combat, and strife, bring into the life such fortune or misfortune as is brought by strife. Successful doctors, surgeons, soldiers, aviators, moving picture stars, mechanics, engineers, and all whose calling requires daring, initiative, aggressiveness, and constructive or destructive ability have the aggressive thought elements prominent in their stellar bodies. He goes on to say, discordant aggressive thinking is responsible for more accidents than is any other type of thought. It is responsible for cuts, surgical operations, burns, infection, contagious diseases such as smallpox, measles, scarlet fever, and chickenpox, and is the most important factor in typhoid, blood poison, malaria, rheumatism, urinary complaints, and some kidney trouble. Together with the social thought elements, it is responsible for the so-called social diseases. In delineating that'll be the next slide. So let's talk about some Mars associations We've already, I'm repeating myself here, but the thought cell is aggressive. It's good to memorize these things. The influence on the house where Mars falls is strife. The metal in alchemy, which is governed by Mars, is the metal iron, here pictured in its natural form as hematite. The gemstones will therefore be hematite and brimstone, which is a form of sulfur that comes out of volcanic fissures. The color associated with Mars is red, the musical tone of C. And the parts of the body which Mars rules have to do with the muscles and the sinews. If you think about it, strength is dependent on Mars. We can neither destroy or build without physical strength. Also, the adrenaline and testosterone are considered to be the hormones that are governed by Mars. These are the hormones that both move us into the action and fight, as well as the male sex hormone, which provides dominantly male characteristics. Okay, in delineating the horoscope, Zane says, the Mars person must have an outlet for his abundant energy, either in constructive or destructive work. He becomes a good manufacturer, surgeon, or mechanic. His best quality is initiative. His worst quality is harshness. He should early realize that there is greater satisfaction in building up than in tearing down, and that undue severity and antagonism hinder constructive enterprise. There is more opportunity for initiative in fighting disease, ignorance, and poverty than in combating any human foe. Thoughts ruled by this planet are called the aggressive thoughts. Now, in horary astrology, the physical description that is provided, Mars, is a wiry, robust body, strong muscles, ruddy complexion, hair with a reddish tinge. So, if you have Mars in the first house, conjuncting the ascendant, Aries or Scorpio governing the first house, this could, in part, give some of your physical description. So, on to our vocabulary building. What I have done is created a list of words. We're going to look first, and I will repeat some of these. Harmonious Mars expressions are initiative, energy, passion, courage, defense, constructive effort, and building up. Discordant Mars expressions are impulsiveness, lust, anger, strife, destruction, aggression, attracting accidents and injuries, and fevers. So, chances are I'm having a minor Mars aspect today. Here we go. In terms of positive Mars traits, I've pulled several words together that I think best describe constructive Mars. What you can do is take any one of these words and sit down with your Roget's thesaurus at home, say that 10 times fast, and start looking up these words and adding to your vocabulary. They're in the order they fall is alphabetical rather than grouped by concept. So positive Mars traits are being active, animated, arduous, assertiveness, one who is bold, brave, chivalrous, competitive, constructive, courageous. Anyone who is dynamic, eager, energetic, enthusiastic. Mars governs excitement, A Mars person is fearless, does things with fervor, is fierce, expresses initiative, is intense in their personality, intrepid, lively, muscular, passionate, productive, resilient, robust, strong, and valorous. Opposite on the scale, you'll see the more destructive traits, or negative Mars traits, which makes one accident-prone, aggressive, angry, antagonistic, and argumentative. They can be brutal, attract catastrophes, express cruelty, be destructive, engage in disasters, suffer emergencies, fevers, fury. They can be harmful, harsh, hasty, hostile, impatient, impetuous, impulsive, injurious, intimidating, intolerant. Rage is an expression of Mars, being rash, attracting surgeries, and your basic unfriendly, violent person. So, if we move on to Mars occupations, you will see that the principle at work here is that of either construction or destruction. Thus, Mars can rule arms dealers, athletes, bodybuilders, bodyguards, bouncers, boxers, coaches, construction workers, daredevils, defense industry workers, emergency medical technicians, firefighters, iron workers, martial arts instructors, machinists, mechanics, the military, paramedics, police officers, servicemen and servicewomen, surgeons, weightlifters, welders, and wrestlers.
I have a question. When they mention coaches, are they thinking of sports coaches?
Yes.
Okay.
Nowadays there's a profession called a life coach,
Yeah.
which is, I think that's only been around for about the last 5 years or so, that particular use of the term. But nevertheless, a life coach can be somebody who gets you off your duff and moves you into initiative or activity. So,
why wouldn't a teacher or instructor be put into that then?
they generally come under Jupiter, which we'll talk about next week. They're more in a ministering profession, though, I mean, there are some teachers that teach martial arts, or teach something athletic, or teach wood shop, or teach metal shop, and we could then stretch it. But again, in astrology, you can have more than one planet that governs a profession. And there are professions that can conceptually stretch across different borders, but we try to assign them just for the sake of study to one category.
So paramedics, like first line responders?
First responders of any kind. If you think about it, we've decided that Mars expresses as, fearlessness, initiative, somebody who's bold and brave, and these are people that have to respond in the face of emergencies, respond in the face of disaster. Oh, right. Another quote, and a really long one. So, that comes up later. Let's talk about a Mars personality. Now, again, if you remember, power in a chart is determined by house position and by aspect. By house position, angular houses tend to be more powerful than succedent or cadent houses. These are 1, 4, 7, and 10. However, sometimes a planet can be in the 12th house or the 9th house, and in conjunction with the ascendant, the cusp of the 1st house, or in the 9th house in conjunction with the midheaven, the cusp of the 10th house. And that starts to add a lot of power to that planet. Occasionally you will see that.
Sorry, could you just repeat those two again?
Um,
You said 12th and 9th house in
yes,
conjunction.
if a planet is in the 12th house or the 9th house, but conjuncting either the ascendant or midheaven, it can sometimes show strength that is unusual for a cadent house position. In this chart, we can see that Mars falls in the 10th house, in an angular house. So angularity is a factor here, and no doubt aspects received by Mars are also going to contribute. Certain aspects are more powerful than others. Aspects such as conjunctions and oppositions are most powerful, and parallels. There are other aspects which are squares, sextiles, trines, which are moderately powerful, and there are minor aspects such as semi-sextile, semi-square, sesqui-square, and inconjuncts that are mildly powerful. So, we could stand here and pick off by hand some of the hard aspects we can actually see, but let's move on and look at the astrodynes. Unfortunately for you at home, I don't know if I corrected your astrodyne form to show the natural order of the planet signs and houses, or whether it is sorted by ascending order from the most powerful to the weakest. But here on the screen, you can see the planets in order of strength. And if you go down the middle column with the percentage sign, you can see the percentage of power from Mars at 12.6% down to Venus at 3.3% of power. So Mars is definitely the strongest, and it does by 1.5% outweigh the next most powerful planet, which is the Moon. Curiously enough, in alchemy, Mars and the Moon are natural antidotes to one another. So there may be the opportunity to discuss that tonight. All right, the right angle that you saw in the light blue here basically outlines aspects formed to Mars. To read your aspect graph, those of you unfamiliar with this form, across the top we have the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter on through Pluto, the midheaven, and the ascendant, the same order descending in the left column. So all the aspects to Mars will show up within the area of these two lines. We can see that Mars forms 6 aspects in this chart. The most powerful here is a trine from Mercury to Mars at 9.67 astrodynes. Back. Let's just talk about that as an aspect. Well, it would be more helpful to actually see the chart. Let's go backwards. Mercury, 3 Libra, 3 minutes, to Mars, 3 Gemini, 23 minutes. This is taking place from the 3rd house of mental pursuits and studies to the 10th house of career, honor, and reputation. And I might have a anecdote later that could describe this. Unfortunately, I did not bring my bio of this person out to the podium with me, so I'm going to have to rely upon memory here. But this, I believe, is a personality I wrote about in the spring or summer quarterly of 2009. And the chart that we're looking at is that of Jean-Claude Killier. Here's another quote. "I will always be someone who wants to do better than others. I love competition." How does that sound for a dominant Mars personality? I'd say that says it all. Those of you who are old enough will remember him from Olympics in the 1960s. And in this country, he was the spokesperson for chapstick, the lip balm, which I remember he had commercials that were quite popular at the time. But to mark out Mars characteristics, Jean-Claude was an athlete, or is probably still, gold medal Olympiad. He was an actor. If we went back to our list and what Zane describes as Mars professions, we are seeing them all here. A race car driver, and ski apparel entrepreneur. He, today, I believe, still serves on the International Olympic Committee, timely since the Winter Olympics are going on at this time, and Jean-Claude won his medals in downhill skiing at the Olympics. Again, if I was smart enough to bring my notes to the table, I could tell you what year and what he won, but he's a gold medal athlete. So let's look at the chart as a whole and work to discover the most powerful aspects, of which the most powerful aspect in his chart is the moon forms a trine to the midheaven. Those of you in the classroom can actually look at the chart in your handouts, and those of you at home who printed them out will have access to the chart as well. So, the moon is in the first house in the sign of Leo, 28 degrees. And the midheaven is in Aries, 29 degrees. Now, when we studied the moon about 3 weeks ago, we decided that the moon seeks notoriety. The moon in Leo in the first house can make for a somewhat bold, flamboyant, expressive personality. And we know that persons with a dominant moon can become household names. Here you can see that it's 11.03 astrodynes associated with this particular aspect. So the midheaven has to do with our honor, our reputation, our public standing, our visibility, and that trine is a luck compound, which we will be talking about tonight, the nature of the trine aspect. But also speaking of luck, the next most powerful aspect in the chart is the fact that Jupiter in the 12th house at 13 Leo conjuncts the 14 Leo ascendant. Conjunctions are prominent compounds, and one might consider Jean-Claude a lucky person. If we look at Mars and his life story, we also know that a lot of tragic things have happened to him. But nevertheless, he's also somebody who has had his, fair share of opportunity, success, and fortune. In line with Mars, I decided to bring this quote from E.M. Forrester. Just need to find where I am in my... Actually, we won't be talking about the Trine tonight. That'll be next week. Failure or success seem to have been allotted to men by their stars, but they retain the power of wriggling, of fighting with their star or against it. And in the whole universe, the only really interesting movement is this wriggle. E.M. Forrester. So Mars is that wriggle. Aspects, if you remember, are the compositions that we look at in an astrological chart. They add energy or power, and they add conditioning energy, harmony, discord, or neutrality. The aspect that I wanted to talk about tonight best represents to some degrees the qualities of Mars, and that is the square aspect. We call the square an obstacle compound. And this aspect is formed when any two planets can be found at right angles to one another, or 90 degrees, or basically 3 signs apart. Almost always, but not always, this will correspond to planets being in the same mode of expression, what we call the quadruplicities, being either movable, fixed, or mutable. There are 4 signs of each quality. But sometimes you can have a planet that's at the end of one sign, the other planet is at the beginning of another sign. So they can be in different quality and still be an aspect to one another. The nature of the square is that it is a very discordant aspect. Squares bring acute conflict and violent antagonisms that often cause radical changes. To work with a square in our chart, it requires determination and carefully directing the planetary energies into their most constructive avenue of expression. So let's look at Killi's chart to see if we can spot a square. Here you have the aspect table, and we can see that the most powerful square here is formed between the Sun and Mars. It has 7.49 astrodites. However, we might think of this as a highly destructive aspect, and yes, this man has been involved in surgeries, accidents, injuries, car wrecks, losses of friends and companions, etc. Plenty of strife has been brought into his life, but in the Brotherhood of Light lessons, Zane describes any aspect between the Sun and Mars as actually being vitalizing. It tends to make for a more vital, energetic, alive human being. As you can imagine, all of those qualities are helpful if you are an Olympiad. So, the square between the Sun and Mars, however, takes place from the second house of money and finance to the 10th house of career, honor, and reputation. So some of the strife or stress here in his life, I don't really have any biographical information about his finances, but one might guess he's not always been successful in all of his business attempts. It could even bring about great expenditure of wealth in trying to open a business or otherwise get involved in his entrepreneurial activities. The next square is from the Sun to Uranus, where that, no, I'm getting a different aspect here, but anyways, what we have are squares also from the Moon to these planets. You'll see if you look just below both Mars and Uranus, there are squares. So what about a Sun-Uranus square? Erratic, possibly abrasive at times, unconventional, inventive, idiosyncratic, unique, independent, rebellious. This is someone who used to ditch school in order to ski. Someone who took a car when he was not legally able to drive and got it in a wreck, killing his friend who he was driving with. So you can see the kind of rebelliousness here, you know, the rebel without a cause, personality going on. From the Moon, here's an example of a planet being at the tail end of one sign. We can see that the Sun in Virgo, a mutable sign, squares the Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, a mutable sign. But in the case of the Moon's at 28 Leo, but nevertheless is forming aspects here. The aspect from the Moon to Uranus is so weak because it's wide. It's a 10-degree orb going on there. But nevertheless, it has 1.47 asteroids associated with it. The Moon, when it squares Uranus, tends towards being emotionally volatile. When the Moon squares Mars, Zane says it can be, and even Ptolemy claimed that Moon-Mars squares and Moon-Mars conjunctions could be responsible for eye complaints. The Moon and Mars square makes one very passionate and very emotional and disruptive. Nevertheless, these two planets, his dominant planets, are in aspect to one another, and my guess is he has probably spent much of his life, just as he has had to learn physical control to make it down the slopes and be successful, he's probably also had to develop other areas of personal control and emotional self-control in order to be successful. And I'm going to skip these others because I'm starting to fade very quickly. So, we've discussed the power urges are in an obstacle compound with the aggressive urges. Can make for a fighter, but it can also make for somebody with a superabundance of energy. These power urges are in an obstacle compound with the individualistic urges. That makes somebody who gets a kick out of being rebellious, individualistic, radical, unconventional, or cutting edge. The domestic urges are in an obstacle compound with the aggressive urges, and we've discussed that already in terms of being emotionally volatile. Hopefully he has someone that does his housework for him and isn't too mean to them. Though that Virgo could have very high expectations. And the domestic urges are in an oppositional compound with the individualistic urges. Now the signs function as the sounding boards for each of the planets. Regardless of what sign Mars falls in, he expresses aggressive urges in that sign. The tone is just different according to the nature of the sign in which he falls. For example, well, let's first talk about Mars movement. We've already decided that it takes 687 days for Mars to orbit the Sun and move through the entire zodiac, spending about 2 months in each sign. The Mars sign is considered to represent the passionate or the aggressive nature of the individual. This sounding board impacts how you express your passion. In the sign of Aries, Zane says, or Albert Benjamin, in Beginner's Horoscope Maker and Reader, with the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I am attitude, initiative should be employed in pioneering and mechanical enterprise rather than in asserting superiority. Mars happens to be at home in the sign of Aries. Both Aries and Mars have a tendency towards being combative, competitive, aggressive, assertive, and energetic. In Taurus, Benjamin says, with the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I have attitude, initiative should be employed in financial matters rather than in seeking sensual pleasures. Mars does not express well in Taurus. If you think about it, it's fixed Earth. For Mars, this is like the concrete galoshes of the mafia.
Oh no.
Yes, if you think about it, he's opposite his home, which is Scorpio. So in Taurus, the nature of Mars there is to be intolerant and to be belligerent. People with Mars in Taurus are not going to do what they won't want to do. They will just, like Ferdinand the Bull in the childhood story, sit down, dig in their heels, and there's no way you're going to move them. For Gemini, with the aggressive urge thought cells expressing from the I think attitude, initiative should be employed in acquiring information rather than in endless talk.
So doing the research.
Take that initiative into, yes, becoming current, finding the facts, doing the research. Persons with Mars and Gemini will ask a lot of questions because they want the easy way, basically. And you can't blame them for that. But basically, the easy way is you tell me. And what my mother might do is say, go look that up in the encyclopedia. Here's a dictionary. Cancer.
Just with the Mars, if I may ask you. I have Mars in Gemini, and astrologers always would say it's a wandering Mars. Do you understand what that might mean? Is it something to do with the nature of, like Mars is more like directed, and Gemini has that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, I've actually never heard that term before, so I don't feel I could address it. But knowing the nature of Gemini and Mars, Mars tends to want to be on course, and Gemini
Goes this and
goes this way, that way.
So Mars
Mars wants a beeline, and Gemini prefers a meandering path.
So there could be tension between in
Yeah,
that position.
there could be, although it's not tense enough that it shows up as being, the detriment or fall or inharmony of Mars. But the thing to know, Samara, is wherever Mars falls, there's tension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just part of the picture. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I feel attitude, initiative should be employed in constructing a pleasant home rather than an outburst of temper.
So intensive homemaking.
Right, build a fence.
Yeah.
Start tilling the soil for a garden.
Get really busy with the house. Yeah, put up pictures, yeah.
I don't know what's happening with my animations here. Now, Mars does not do well in Cancer. Why? It's opposite his exaltation, which is Capricorn. This means Mars is at his fall in Cancer. And what happens in this emotional sign, this tender, touchy emotional sign, you put Mars there, he gets pouty and grumpy, but it's also a sign where he cannot normally express his initiative. It tends to make him more passive and whiny. I always like to use the metaphor of the blacksmith who takes the red hot poker and sticks it into the bucket of water.
Mm.
That's Mars in Cancer.
Well, I've been having that experience for a while with my Mars, reverse Mars, and the way it feels to me, of course, there are many other factors, the way it feels to me is that there's no way for the energy to go. It just doesn't seem to make it
Right,
go.
once the poker hits the water, the energy goes out of the
Yeah.
poker. It loses its red glow.
So there's it's almost like no manifestation or no fruit almost in a way. It's just, so it's a kind of a frustrating combination.
That's why it is at its fall there.
It's interesting.
All right, Mars in Leo, with the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I will attitude, initiative should be employed in entertaining rather than in seeking to compel others to obey orders. Imagine that. Yeah, people like you more when you tell them stories rather than when you tell them what to do. Mars is at his harmony in the sign of Leo, where he can express an executive nature. So think about it. Mars does well in the fire signs, for the most part. His home is in Aries, and his harmony is in Leo. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I analyze attitude, initiative should be employed in finding better ways of performing work rather than in fault finding. Libra is not a good position for Mars. It's opposite his home in Aries. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I balance attitude, initiative should be employed in making a success of marriage rather than in making a hasty union. So in other words, don't be so quick to get involved. Find someone you can be compatible with. Now, if you think about it, Libra is the sign of balance, peace, harmony, equilibrium, beauty, poise, grace. Mars is sort of like the bull in the china shop. So, he's at his detriment in a sign that would rather make peace than war. He feels restricted in that sign. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I desire attitude, initiative should be employed developing the resourcefulness rather than in self-indulgence or revenge. Scorpio is one of the two home signs of Mars. What Mars and Aries have in common are combat, competitiveness, and aggression. What Mars and Scorpio have in common is both passion and cruelty. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I-C attitude, initiative should be employed acquiring a satisfactory philosophy rather than in questionable sports. What's a questionable sport?
It's like someone's a bit biased here, huh? Oh, maybe it's just, I guess, sports that are rather extreme sports that can be very destructive.
Very good. I'm sorry?
Dogfighting.
Dogfighting. Over the last few years, there have been news spots on teenagers who are doing these extreme things, getting up and on top of cars while they're going fast and, falling off and getting brain damage or dying. Those are extreme sports. Mars at Capricorn. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I use attitude, initiative should be employed in seeking honors through benefiting others, rather than merely in benefiting self. Now, Mars is exalted in the sign of Capricorn. Basically, this is an avenue that is so structured. It is Earth, it is structured, but it is movable Earth. So his energies get to express in a purely constructive channel. In Aquarius, it's another story. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I know attitude, initiative should be employed in humanitarian reforms rather than controversies.
Is that a comment?
No, that was the computer.
Oh.
Come, move forward. So Mars is at his inharmony in the sign of Aquarius, opposite his harmony in Leo. He tends to be verbally disruptive in that sign, and tends to be quarrelsome. So, Pisces. With the aggressive thought cells expressing from the I believe attitude, initiative should be employed in positive action rather than merely in wishful thinking. All right, the houses we've talked about already, they are the auditorium. So where you're seated in this auditorium determines how well you get to hear the music. There are doors, windows, and walls that separate you from the music which is being played outside. We've covered this information before, but basically, as a planet occupies a house, it brings specific influences into that department of life, that house. The planet closest to the house cusp is considered the ruler of that house. If there is more than one planet in the house, the other planets become the co-rulers. Now, if the house is unoccupied, nobody's at home, then the planet or planets ruling the sign on the cusp of the house give us the information about that house and its influences. Where Mars falls in a birth chart, we say it's subject to strife. This is going to be an area of your life where you either express passion or where you get hurt. What Zane says in Orrery Astrology, and all of these quotes are in your notes, in your handouts, for you to go back to later. The house position of Mars strongly indicates the area of life through which the individual finds passion and/or conflict. That's mine. The quote is, whatever house is occupied by Mars indicates a section of the life in which forcefulness and energy are expressed. Whatever it indicates in the way of advantage is gained through initiative and combat. And if loss is indicated, there is much struggle associated with it. There is always strenuous activity in connection with the things ruled by the house occupied by Mars. Thus, in the chart, on the frontispiece, as Mars occupies the 8th, that has nothing to do with tonight's class, he's talking about a chart in course 8. Struggle over the partner's money. The department of life ruled by the house occupied by Mars is subject to strife. So, if Mars is in the first house, with the aggressive thought cells expressing through the personality, mechanical ability and willingness to face danger are shown. Constructive activities should be substituted for those destructive. We gave you the physical appearance earlier of someone with Mars in the first house. You know, muscular, sinewy, tight form, reddish complexion. What about someone with Mars in the first house? Are they a gentle giant?
No.
Generally not. They tend to be more of an in-your-face personality. You know, it's like when dogs are fighting and another dog comes by, they get drawn to the fight. That's sort of what Mars in the first house can do, unless one decides to take it down purely constructive channels in the form of athletics or acting ability, etc. In the second house, Albert Benjamin says, with the aggressive thought cells expressing through possessions, strife over money, and too free spending are shown. Spending only for that which is constructive and permanent should be cultivated. Basically, Mars in the second house treats money like a hot potato. It cannot get it out of its hands fast enough. So if you have Mars there, or if you have Scorpio or Aries on the cusp, that might be an experience of yours, that it's much easier for you to spend money than to make money. The advantage, however, is when Mars falls there, you do have the desire energy there. So if you set about to focus on the acquisition or gain of money, it can be done. Third house, with the aggressive thought cells expressing through education, danger in travel and strife with relatives are shown. Thoughts of helping the weak should be substituted for thoughts antagonistic. Mars in the third house, fights with your neighbors, your brothers, your sisters, car accidents. Mars there just, you know, if somebody drew a crack on the sidewalk with chalk, you'd probably trip over it. With the aggressive thought cells expressing through the home, strife and accident in the home are shown. Making it a place of shelter and protection for the weak should be cultivated. Mars in the fourth house. There can be fighting in the home. It could represent a father who is militaristic in some ways, martial in some ways. If it's really badly aspected, sometimes that can indicate abuse in early childhood.
I just have a comment or a question around this thing about helping the weak, shelter and protection for the weak. It's kind of a general statement, but what I'm kind of reading into it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it can be like that's where any kind of, it doesn't have to be just weak people, it's just people who might need something or people who are disadvantaged in some way.
Right, the language is different because
Yeah.
it's, 70 years old.
Yeah.
But actually what's going on here, because Mars is a malefic, it almost always has to be antidoted. And the antidote for Mars is the moon. So almost all of the attitudes which Benjamin expresses here are either going to be converting Mars towards constructiveness, building up rather than tearing down, or applying the lunar energies, which have to do with caring for those in need.
I keep coming up with the idea of being an advocate, or like even for people who are oppressed or in any kind of disadvantaged position. Would you say that could be? It could be construed in that way, because that kind of widens me conceptually when I start thinking about those avenues.
That could be an advocate for somebody who may be housebound.
Yeah.
With the aggressive thought cells expressing through pleasure, strife, and perhaps danger through sports and love affairs are shown. Protection of the weak and helpless should be cultivated. Let me go back. Mars in the 5th house.
Just one other question about that thing about the weak. Could that also be anything that, or any being or anything that could be dependent on you in any way?
It could be a
like
cat,
plants,
it could be a plant.
or cats.
Yeah, anything
The
that
environment.
Demands assistance of some kind.
Yeah, nurturing demands that kind of support. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Mars in the 5th house. One can be very quick to fall in love and quick to fall out of love. Romances can be very passionate. Relationships with children can be filled with strife. Occasionally people have children they don't like. And frequently children have parents they don't like. At least for part of the story. Usually they're teenage to early 20s. Some start earlier. But Mars in the 5th house can certainly indicate that. And I've had clients with Mars there whose children have suffered accidents, or where they may, if Mars might inadvertently rule the 8th house, there could be loss. A child predeceasing a parent. And I'm not saying you're having Mars there will necessarily indicate that, but that is one of the extreme expressions. With the aggressive thought cells expressing through work, strife with employees, and inflammatory disorders are shown. Thoughts of helping the weak, here you have it again, Samara, should be substituted for thoughts antagonistic. I think that came up in the 3rd house too.
So being a helpful co-worker.
Can I bring you a cup of coffee? Let me make coffee for you.
Do you want me to help you with this task?
Yeah, you need stapling done? I'll do it. Oh, I'm going out to lunch. You want me to bring you anything back?
Yeah.
It's a way of, instead of picking on people or feeling antagonistic towards them, you look at how you can nurture them. What can I do that's going to lighten your load? Mars in the 7th house. Yeah. With the aggressive thought cells expressing through partnership, lawsuits and strife with partners in the public are shown. Constructive efforts should be substituted for enmities. Basically, if you got Mars in your 7th house, you love to bicker with your spouse or your best friends or whoever you're in a relationship with. It can make you very teasing or short-tempered or impatient with them.
I'd imagine there are a lot of like situations where people are suing each other and divorcing.
It creates a litigious attitude.
Yeah.
And Mars in the 7th house, you never know when the bar you go into is the one that's going to erupt into the brawl. You can be out in the public when all hell breaks loose. You know, walking down the street after the soccer match.
Right.
With the aggressive thought cells expressing through inheritance, danger of violent death and strife over debts and inheritances are shown. Not to make any of you anxious. Both borrowing and lending should be discouraged, yes.
Wow. So.
Mars, in old-timey astrology, as I call it, Mars in the 8th house can indicate a violent death.
Wow. It seems to me it's calling for self-sufficiency. You know, in that both borrowing and lending should be discouraged. It's saying, look, hold your own, keep your own patch. You know, don't go one way or the other. Is that
right? Because that's the 8th house. It's either your, matters of credit or your matters of lending to others. Well, what happens with Mars there if you lend to someone? You don't see it again. Mm-hmm. What happens with Mars there if you borrow money? We know there's a good chance you could spend it all. Mm-hmm. You have trouble repaying. Mm-hmm. Mars in the 9th house. With the aggressive thought cells expressing through philosophy, strife over religion and opinions is shown. Thoughts presented constructively should be substituted for attacks on the opinions of others.
Could that also just indicate that, I'm trying to look at other words other than strife. Could it be dissatisfaction with religions and so on? So it's more like trying to break something apart in some way.
Right. Well, Mars in the 9th house is oftentimes a crusader.
Right.
They have a mission they're on,
right.
And they will shove it down your throat, whether that's what you want for breakfast or not.
Right.
You're going to get it. So he's advising that maybe that's not the best approach.
Right.
You know, you don't want to go to a restaurant in Paris and talk about how awful the French are.
Yeah.
Wrong place to express those opinions. So, Mars can create impulsiveness in ideas or very harsh public expression of ideas. It can create difficulties. One can give you initiative to study and form disciplines academically or religiously, but it can also mean that you pick fights with your professors, your mentors, your teachers, you fall into attacking those who are in authority positions philosophically or spiritually or academically. 10th house, with the aggressive thought cells expressing through honor, much criticism of the individual is shown. Protecting the weak and helpless, heard that statement before, should be cultivated. Here, you're being advised to do it in the realm of your career. Become an advocate. Take initiative somewhere. Build up. Do Habitat for Humanity. Go swing a hammer and take care of others.
I'm wondering, Mars is in my is progressed in my 10th house. How long does Mars actually take to go through a sign?
Mars takes about 2 years to go through each degree. So that'd be about 60 years to go through a sign.
And when it's progressed, though?
By 60 years by major progression. We know it takes 57 days by transiting motion, which translates into a year for a day, 57, 60 years more or less for it to pass through a sign.
Right. I noticed that I would attract criticism even if I didn't do anything to draw attention. That was how finely tuned it was for a number of years. It was just like I was everyone's pet projection. So it's kind of interesting.
So it was in Virgo, or?
No, actually, it's in Cancer. So I don't know how that would relate. Mars in
Either
Cancer.
you were receiving people's criticisms, or you were hypersensitive to them, which is the nature of Cancer.
Right. That implies a judgment, doesn't it? Being hypersensitive.
Well, and some people are.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've met some. I have. That there are some people who have 10 alarm reactions to 1 alarm fires.
There's a question. Is it?
I'm not saying that's you,
No,
or that was your experience,
it's something
but
to think about.
these are different ways to look at it.
It could also.
Question online?
Yeah, is it often a good thing to have the moon in the same house as Mars? Is it a good thing?
Only, it's a very hard to answer without seeing an actual example. My comment on that is the Mars can be in the same house and possibly either in a conjunction, no aspect at all, or at the widest a semi-sextile, unless you're born in Iceland or northern Scotland or someplace like that, where it might even be you might even be able to get a semi-square between the planets in the house. Nevertheless, when 2 planets, I have both Mars and the Moon in the same house. And the nature of that, though, is it can both bring strife, and it can also bring the antidote to that, which is nurturing and caretaking and sensitivity. So, and Mars and the Moon in my chart form no aspect to one another. They're separated by 20 degrees.
Does that mean then, I mean, I guess you could only go from your own experience, but that you can easily access the antidote?
Well described.
Yeah.
Easy access. Because they're floating in the same area. So when it requires applying an antidote to that region, it's already there sitting on the back seat with the troublemaker. There are advantages and disadvantages to that depending on the strength of each planet. If the Moon is stronger, there's a good chance that she'll be more successful at antidoting the Mars. If the Mars is stronger, it's a possibility that you bring up Moon issues there, and it intensifies the Mars. Then you're adding emotion to anger.
Oh, yeah. And could it also be that if Mars is being constructive, the Moon might exert a rather wishy-washy or like her own negative or rather weaker qualities?
Passivity would be the quality of the moon and initiative of Mars, which is why they're such natural antidotes.
So there may be a bit of a conflict in that.
Well, there is both a conflict, but there's also the fact that these energies, although dissimilar, blend well together. That's why we keep seeing over and over, protecting the weak and helpless should be cultivated.
It's almost like they're doing a Libran thing, their thing. If they're both there, they kind of they can balance each other out. I mean, I guess it would depend on...
It's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah,
it's so hard to make.
Yeah.
We and computers can make broad generalities about chart reading.
Yeah.
Where computers are good for doing the math for charts, but when you go to get an interpretation, all it can do is spiel out a paragraph on Mars in the first house, Mars in the second house, Mars in Libra, Mars in Virgo, Mars square the moon. And you can get little bits of information, but it can't synthesize the whole picture. And the astrologer has to be very deft at doing that. So the astrologer has to learn each of these separate statements, but then be able to assess the chart, weigh them against one another, look at relative powers and harmonies or discords, and take all of that into account and what aspects are being received by other planets. So it's a synthesis of information that takes place when we read a chart. Whereas if you've ever had a computer printout on a chart, you just get paragraphs of information arranged in a particular order, but they don't necessarily relate to one another, and the trained astrologer can, at a glance, start to see all of those relationships. With the aggressive thought cells expressing through friends, quarrels with friends, and friends who become enemies are shown. Constructive thoughts and actions should be substituted for the irritation and antagonism in attempting to realize the hopes.
Christopher, there was another question about the 10th house. It says, Mars and Neptune together in the 10th. What will the effect be there?
Well, one has to be very cautious with Mars and Neptune conjoined anywhere. In that one can be prone to pipe dreams. The nature of those two planets, unless it's used so constructively, on the positive side, one can take the imagination of Neptune and apply the initiative of Mars and get things done. But, and again, if anybody has ever known, let's say, a pothead, they may sit around and come up with really great ideas and what they're going to do and change the world, and then what happens? Nothing. So that's, I'm not saying whoever's out there is a pothead, but I'm saying you have to make sure if you have a dream that you do something about it, that you fuel the fantasy with initiative, but also make sure that it is something that can be realized within the environment where you live. You may have this great dream, living in your igloo that you want to grow orchids because it'll beautify your environment. Yeah, chances are you don't have enough light and warmth there. Perhaps humidity with the, the ice melting from the heat of your, seal oil lamp. But you won't have all the factors that you need to do that. So again, if you dream big dreams, you have to then look within the environment to see if you plant that seed in that environment, is it going to grow? Hope that answers your question. So Mars in the 11th house, it's so well expressed here. I have a family member with Mars in the 11th house, who I have seen at dinner parties with friends fly into furies. And depending on how much wine has been drunk, they could be best friends by the end of the evening and weeping into their beer. So, but it can bring these fiery and antagonistic relationships with friends, which you might possibly forget the next day.
Okay, there's two questions. The first one is Mars conjunct Pluto in the 2nd, and the other is Mars conjunct Saturn in the 8th.
Bless you both. One, I would say, this is advice to both of you since it's falling in financial houses. Get help.
Do you want to I don't know if you want to, I don't know if they can hear me or not.
Oh, the question?
Can they?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Because they might.
Mars conjunct Pluto in the 2nd house.
We'll address them one at a time.
Okay.
Mars conjunct Pluto in the 2nd house. You have the aggressive urges in a prominent compound with the universal welfare urges in the house of personal finance, the way in which you acquire money and possessions, and the way in which you spend or release yourself of such. So, Mars and Pluto can be very drastic, would be one of the descriptions of that. This may be somebody that occasionally goes through these ascetic periods in their life where they decide they're going to take everything to the recycle, have a garage sale, or give away all of their, personal wealth and start all over again. Think of it as the phoenix rising from the ashes in the realm of money and finances. I can't stand this employment anymore. I'm going to start over in something completely new or different. Or I don't like my Melmac plates anymore. I'm going to, replace them with Limoges china. Who knows what the extreme might be, but it functions in extremes, and they would definitely have to train themselves in the acquisition, saving, and careful spending of money. Whenever Pluto's involved, you're tied into bigger cycles in yourself, much like this economic recession that's affecting all of us. Someone with Pluto in the 2nd house could be impacted by being in an industry that suddenly becomes void during a change in, world trends and patterns. So one has to work at being very constructive, and as I was saying, in both cases, you need a good accountant or financial advisor, nobody that's going to get you into schemes, but into more sound investments and savings plans, and develop a habit system of not spending more than you actually can afford to spend, which is the nature of Mars. In the 8th house, Mars and Saturn, then chances are you may end up having experiences of having to deal with estates, taking power of attorney. You might end up having to sit at people's bedsides as they pass over, or have painful losses and experiences through death and or the spirit world. If it's really other bad aspects, there is the possibility of somebody who experiences psychic persecutions of some kind. That's the extreme. However, not everyone that has that aspect will have, their poltergeists and thumping and table rappings and all of that going on.
Could that also include possession?
Again, depending on the sign, if the other factors in the chart show someone to be mediumistic.
Or attachment or something?
Yeah, it could certainly not necessarily be possessive, but there could be a negative force that can attach itself to someone. And we're certainly going into the realm of ooh right now. And I'm not saying this to scare one. One must really approach all of that with reason, or you could start to develop paranoia in the areas of the paranormal. And so, caution. But knowing that, yes, somebody may ask you to be their executor, and you may have nothing but strife, hardship, and not ever receive any inheritance. Hope I didn't pop your bubble. Mars in the 12th house. And then we're going to end early because I'm starting to lose my voice and everything that resembles Mars energy. With the aggressive thought cells expressing through disappointment, injury from secret enemies, and a tendency towards hospitalization or shown, aggressive effort to protect the weak and helpless. Heard that statement before? And alleviate their suffering should be cultivated. 12th house can be such things as ashrams, hospitals, sanatoriums. Hospice. Therefore, one needs to try and be really constructive in those areas. I would advise you with Mars in the 12th house, don't own a gun. You will use it, or it will be used against you. Question?
We have a question back. When
Mars
in
is,
the 8th, yeah.
when Mars is in Cancer in the 8th house, squaring the Sun, Jupiter, Neptune, Mercury, and Libra in the 10th. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Well, we know Mars in Cancer is not a great place for it. It tends to fizzle out in energy. 10th house is all to do with career and honor, so this is probably somebody who's very driven and entrepreneurial, and where they would have to be careful is in the source of funding that they look for their business. Sometimes if you don't have great gobs of cash yourself, you have to go to lenders in order to get your money. This could be either being turned down by the, Small Business Administration. It is an obstacle compound. If that happens, you don't necessarily want to seek out loan sharks that might break your kneecaps if you can't repay them. So you've got to be very careful as you work with revenue streams, but it's also the resources of a partner, and you'd have to be careful in business matters in terms of what is actually available to you through those persons that want to partner with you. And partners are not just the people that you're legally involved with in business. It can also be persons that provide services to your business. So let's say you're a hotel, it's your person that provides you your sheet cleaning services. So I'm sure you could all stretch your imaginations to come up with other such things, but you'd have to exercise caution in those relationships. So we're going to do the self-inquiry, and we're going to pull this to a close a half hour early tonight, and I apologize to all of you for that. So go home. We had a really great question after class that last week from Samara, which is, I'm going home and working on all of this. How do I get to apply it? So Vicki and I had a conversation Tuesday. She's actually not yet committed, but thinking of how to somehow create a lab class after this course ends in another 5 weeks, in order to get those that want to participate in applying the information of the self-discovery. And we'll try and do the same after the next course, which will probably start out in late April or May, which will be about 5 weeks on the Hermetic system of progressions. And we'll try and include lab in that class as well for hands-on application of materials learned to one's own life. So for this, my Mars, in my chart, Mars falls in the sign of, write down the sign. Some of the best expressions of this sign are, pick the best qualities and any you can think of. Some of the worst expressions of this sign are, Pick the worst quality of the sign and any others you can think of. Then choose the house which Mars falls in, and write down the activities ruled by that house. And then, thinking about the activities of that house, write down how you express your feelings of intensity, drive, and passion, but through that particular arena of your life. And then you look at your astrodynes and write down what the power is, both the astrodyne power and the percentage of the power. And then look at the relative harmony or discord. There's a very good chance you could have a nice minus in front of a big number, since Mars is a minor malefic. But you know what? Mars could be involved with trines or sextiles to Venus and Jupiter in your chart, and therefore you might not see a minus sign there. So there are certainly options in this category. Then you write down the way I perceive this affecting me is positive qualities of Mars that I express are, and the negative qualities of Mars I express. So, as you can see here, 5 more classes, Jupiter, and then and Saturn, and then we move to the 3 upper octave planets in March. All right, no more questions from the audience out there. Forgive me, but I'm going to sign off, and thank you for attending tonight.